Our home resembled a military camp while I was growing up. My father ran a tight ship as a college professor. Sarah, my older sister, was the ideal child, docile, industrious, and constantly willing to please. Me, I was the one who always pushed the envelope, the wild card. My father would yell, "Carol, sit up straight," as we were eating supper. A lady doesn't slouch. I would straighten my back and roll my eyes, but as soon as he turned away, I would fall back down. It was a never-ending struggle of wills. The quieter one, my mother, was just as severe. She would furrow her lips in disapproval of my choice of companions or attire. She kept saying, "What will the neighbors think?" Even if the atmosphere at home was oppressive, I was able to find some freedom. At the age of 16, I began dating Jake. When he was 19, he was attending college and doing whatever that my parents would not approve of. We kept it a secret and took advantage of every opportunity to spend time together. Life appeared to be improving. In order to finally break free from the confining influence of my parents' expectations, I intended to attend college. However, it appears that fate had other ideas. I began experiencing morning sickness a few months after turning 18. I initially dismissed it as anxiety related to my impending tests. But as the days passed, a persistent hunch started to surface. I vividly recall looking at the small plastic stick in my shaking hands while standing in the cramped restroom of a petrol station. 2 lines of pink. Good, I was expecting a child. I was in a stupor for the next several days, trying to think out what to do. Every time I picked up the phone, my bravery let me down, even though I knew I had to tell Jake. I finally ran out of time to put it off. We got together at our typical location, a little park tucked away from prying eyes. When Jake first saw me, he was beaming, but as soon as he realized how I was looking, his face plummeted. He reached for my hand and asked, "Carol, what's wrong?" I wrapped my arms about myself and withdrew. "I'm pregnant," I said without thinking. The ensuing hush was deafening. Jake's expression fluctuated between amazement, incredulity, and dread. At last he managed to ask, "Are you sure?" With tears in my eyes, I nodded. 3 tests were administered to me. They were all favorable. Jake's eyes were icy as he combed through his hair. "Caroline, you have to stop having abortions. There is no other option. This is too young for us. It would destroy our life together." What I was hearing was unbelievable. Jake, the person I believed I loved, was encouraging me to have our kid aborted as if it were a little inconvenience. Get out of my sight. I turned my back on him and snarled. I was left alone with my thoughts and the burden of the decision I now had to make when he walked away without saying anything more. What was worst was telling my parents. I waited until my father was reading the newspaper in the living room, where he always is after supper. Sarah was there, lingering in the background as my mother knitted. I said, "I have something to tell you," in a trembling voice. With a dubious look on his face, my father put down his newspaper. "What is it, Carol?" I inhaled deeply. "I'm pregnant." The ensuing explosion was worse than I had anticipated. As he screamed about disappointment and guilt, my father's face turned a frightening shade of crimson. Worried about what the neighbors might think, my mother started crying. Sarah simply stood there with a shocked and disgusted expression on her face. My father said, "You will get an abortion," once he had regained enough composure to speak clearly. "We'll locate a private clinic. Nobody should be aware of this error." Even though I was reluctant at first, I eventually gave in to the persistent pressure from my family. My mother and Sarah were seated next to me like jail guards in a sterile doctor's office a few days later. The doctor, a kind woman in her 50s, frowned as she went over my charts. Her eyes were filled with worry as she gazed up at me. She replied softly, "Carol, I need to tell you of something important. Given your medical history and certain risk factors, if you proceed with an abortion, there's a high likelihood that you may never be able to have children again." I was struck by the words like a ton of bricks. Never again have children. All of a sudden, the decision seemed obvious. I responded, "No," in a louder voice than I had anticipated. I refused to do it. "This baby is mine to keep." Sarah and my mother rolled their eyes, but I refused to back down. It was a quiet and nervous trip home. My father was waiting for us as soon as we entered the room. Well, he had insisted. My mother spit that she wouldn't do it. When my father said, "After everything we've done for her," his face twisted in anger. "You ungrateful little." He took a big breath and interrupted himself. His voice was icy and decisive when he spoke again. "Get out," he said. "Get out of this place and pack your things. You're not my daughter. I won't allow your illness to humiliate our family." With stern eyes, my mother nodded in accord. She remarked, "You heard your father." Sarah simply stood there with tears running down my cheeks, critical and mute. I hurried to my room and stuffed a bag with some clothing. My father's voice interrupted me one final time as I was about to leave. "And don't think about coming back. As far as we're concerned, you're dead to us." The door slammed behind me, the sound final and devastating. I was alone, pregnant, and homeless. In desperation, I called the only person I thought might help, my Aunt Linda. She and Uncle Bob had always been the black sheep of the family, living in another state and rarely speaking to my parents. "Carol, what's wrong, sweetie?" Aunt Linda's voice was warm and concerned. Through tears, I explained everything. There was a long pause after I finished. "Where are you now?" she finally asked. "Outside our house. They kicked me out." Another pause. "Stay right there. We're coming to get you." The drive to Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob's house was long, but it gave me time to process everything that had happened. Their house was modest but welcoming. As soon as we arrived, Aunt Linda went into full mother hen mode, fussing over me and insisting I eat something. Uncle Bob carried my bag to the spare room, which would now be my room. "It's not much," he said, setting the bag down, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." I looked around the small, cozy room and felt a lump in my throat. "It's perfect," I whispered. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, discussions about my future, and adjusting to my new life. "We've been thinking," Aunt Linda said one evening over dinner. "We want to help you continue your education." I looked up from my plate, surprised. "What do you mean?" Uncle Bob leaned forward. "We've set aside some money over the years. We never had kids of our own, so we thought we'd use it to help you go to college." I was speechless. After everything that had happened, the idea of being able to pursue my dreams seemed impossible. I don't know what to say. "Say yes," Aunt Linda smiled. "We believe in you, Carol. This baby doesn't have to mean the end of your dreams." And so, with their support, I enrolled in a local community college, majoring in business management. It wasn't easy balancing classes with doctor's appointments and the increasing discomfort of pregnancy, but I was determined to make it work. I also found a job as a waitress at a local restaurant. The owner, a kind woman named Maria, was understanding about my situation and flexible with my hours. It wasn't much, but it allowed me to start saving for the baby and contribute a little to Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob's household. The day my son was born was the most terrifying and beautiful day of my life. After hours of labor, I held him in my arms, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob were there, beaming with pride like grandparents. "What are you going to name him?" Aunt Linda asked softly. I looked down at my son's face, so peaceful in sleep. "Daniel," I said, "it means God is my judge, because no matter what anyone else thinks, I know I made the right choice." As I settled into motherhood, juggling a newborn with college classes and work, I often thought about my parents and Sarah. Had they heard about Daniel? Did they ever regret their decision? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I had a new family now, one that accepted me and loved me unconditionally. One day, as I was scrolling through social media during a rare moment of downtime, a post caught my eye. It was from Sarah. My heart skipped a beat as I read it. "Excited to announce that Jake and I are engaged. Can't wait to start our life together." The photo showed Sarah beaming, her arm around Jake, the same Jake who had abandoned me and our child. They looked happy, carefree, like nothing had ever happened. I felt a surge of emotions: anger, hurt, betrayal. But as I looked over at Daniel, peacefully playing in his crib, I realized something. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had everything I needed right here. The years flew by in a blur of diapers, textbooks, and late-night study sessions. My last semester was particularly challenging. I was taking extra classes to graduate on time, still working at the restaurant, and chasing after an energetic 3-year-old. Graduation day was a whirlwind of emotions. As I stood in line waiting to receive my diploma, I scanned the crowd. Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob were there, of course, beaming with pride. Daniel sat on Uncle Bob's shoulders, waving excitedly every time he caught my eye. The real surprise came at the graduation party Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob threw for me. As we were celebrating, Maria, my boss from the restaurant, pulled me aside. "Carol, I have a proposition for you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I'm looking for a new restaurant manager, and I think you'd be perfect for the job." I was stunned. "Me? But I've only ever been a waitress." Maria waved her hand dismissively. "You've been much more than that. I've seen how you handle difficult customers, how you organize the staff, how you balance work and school and motherhood. That's the kind of dedication and skill I need in a manager." It was a dream come true, a stable job with better pay and regular hours, exactly what I needed for Daniel and me to start our new life. The next few years were a whirlwind of positive changes. I threw myself into my new role at the restaurant, learning everything I could about management and business operations. Daniel started school, growing into a bright, curious boy who loved to read and play baseball. It was at one of Daniel's Little League games that I met Tom. He was there with his son, Michael, who was on the opposing team. We struck up a conversation, and I was immediately drawn to his kind eyes and easy laugh. "Single, Dad?" I asked, noticing he was alone. He nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "Widower, actually. Michael's mom passed away when he was a baby." My heart went out to him. "I'm so sorry. It must be tough." "It is," he admitted, "but we manage." "How about you? Single mom?" I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" Our relationship developed slowly. We were both cautious, having been hurt before, and with our children to consider. But as the months passed, I found myself falling for Tom. He was kind, patient, and Daniel adored him. A year after we met, Tom proposed. It wasn't a grand theatrical gesture, just a quiet moment in his backyard with our boys playing nearby. Our wedding was small and intimate, just close friends and family. As I walked down the aisle, Daniel proudly by my side as the ring bearer, I caught Aunt Linda's eye. She was crying, but her smile was radiant. Life with Tom, Daniel, and Michael settled into a comfortable rhythm. A couple of years after our wedding, we were blessed with another addition to our family. Our daughter, Emily, was born on a warm spring morning. As I held her in my arms with Tom, Daniel, and Michael gathered around the hospital bed, I felt a sense of completeness I'd never experienced before. I loved all three of my children equally, Daniel and Emily, my biological children, and Michael, my stepson. They were all my kids, regardless of blood ties. One evening, as Aunt Linda was over helping with the kids, we were startled by a familiar voice coming from the TV. There, larger than life, were my parents. My father was standing at a podium, waving to a cheering crowd. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "John Williams announces his candidacy for mayor." I felt my heart stop. It had been years since I'd seen my parents, even if only on a screen. My father looked older, his hair grayer, but his eyes still held that stern, determined look I remembered so well. As we watched him speak about family values and moral integrity, Aunt Linda's face contorted with anger. "Hypocrites," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. I turned to her, shocked by her outburst. "Aunt Linda." She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving the screen. "There's something you need to know, Carol. Something they've hidden for years." What she told me next shook me to my core. Many years ago, before Sarah and I were born, my parents had their first child, a boy. But he was born with severe physical defects, without legs. Instead of embracing their child, they left him at the hospital, afraid he would embarrass them. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a profound sadness for the brother I never knew. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked. Aunt Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Carol. I should have, but after what they did to you, I didn't want to add to your pain. That night, after the kids were in bed, I made a decision. I needed to find my brother. With Tom's support, I hired a private investigator. Weeks passed, and finally, we got a lead. My brother was alive, and against all odds, he had thrived. He was a successful writer, married with children of his own. He had been adopted by a wealthy family who had given him every opportunity to succeed in life. Meeting him for the first time was surreal. Despite his physical differences, I could see echoes of my own features in his face. His name was James, and he greeted me with a warm smile and open arms. "I always knew I had a biological family out there somewhere," he said, his voice gentle. "I just never expected to find a sister." Over the next few months, James and I grew close. I introduced him to my family, and he welcomed us into his. His wife, Sarah, a coincidence that made me laugh, and their 2 children became a part of our extended family. 20 years had passed since that fateful day when my parents kicked me out of their house. Life had moved on, bringing its share of joys and sorrows. My eldest, Daniel, was now 19 and had just started college on a baseball scholarship. I couldn't have been prouder of the young man he'd become. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as I was scrolling through news articles on my tablet, a familiar face caught my eye. It was my father, looking older but still carrying that air of self-importance I remembered so well. The headline read, "Mayor John Williams discusses family values in exclusive interview." Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on the video. For a few minutes, I listened to my father espouse the importance of family integrity and moral values. Then the interviewer asked about his children. My father's face softened into what I recognized as his public sympathy look. "I have one daughter, Sarah. She's the light of our lives. Tragically, we lost 2 of our children. The pain never really goes away, but it's made our family stronger. For days, I see that with a quiet rage. How dare they? How dare they erase me, erase James, and paint themselves as tragic, sympathetic figures?" Then, almost as if fate was intervening, James called Carol. "Guess what? I'm doing a book signing in our hometown next week. It would mean the world to me if you could come." I wouldn't miss it for the world, I told James, a plan already forming in my mind. The following week, I found myself back in the city of my childhood. As I walked the familiar streets, memories flooded back, some good, many painful. I pushed them aside, focusing on what I needed to do. The book signing was being held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. As I entered, I saw that James hadn't exaggerated. It seemed like half the town was there, local celebrities, business leaders, and politicians, all mingling, waiting for the event to begin. And there, in the front row, sat my parents and Sarah. My father, now the mayor, looked every inch the distinguished politician. My mother, elegantly dressed, smiled and nodded at acquaintances. Sarah was sitting next to them. They hadn't seen me yet. I took a seat near the back, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Then James rolled onto the stage in a wheelchair to enthusiastic applause. He looked confident, at ease in the spotlight. As he began to speak about his book and his life, I saw my parents nodding sympathetically. I was born with a severe physical disability, James was saying. No legs and other health issues. My biological parents abandoned me at the hospital, unable or unwilling to care for a child with my needs. I watched my father's face carefully. He showed no sign of recognition, no hint of shame. Just the carefully crafted mask of a politician expressing appropriate concern for a constituent. Sad story, James continued. I was fortunate. I was adopted by a wonderful family who gave me every opportunity to succeed. But I always wondered about my birth family. Who were they? Why did they give me up? The room was silent, all eyes fixed on James as he continued his story. I stood to the side, my heart racing, waiting for the moment that would change everything. Then James smiled, his eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and determination. But that's not the end of our story, he said. You see, I found my family. My sister Carol is here with us today. He turned towards me, extending his hand. Carol, would you join me on stage? A collective gasp rippled through the audience as I stepped into the spotlight. I saw recognition dawn on many faces. After all, I had grown up in this town. But the most striking reactions came from the front row. My parents' faces drained of color, their expressions a mixture of shock, fear, and dawning comprehension. Sarah, my sister, looked like she'd seen a ghost. They knew their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. My parents stood abruptly, clearly intending to make a hasty exit, but I wasn't about to let them escape the truth again. Mom, Dad, please stay. I called out, my voice echoing through the now silent room. I think it's time we had an honest conversation, don't you? They froze, trapped by the eyes of the entire audience. Slowly, reluctantly, they sank back into their seats. I took a deep breath. Many of you knew me growing up. You knew my family, but there's a lot you didn't know. A lot that's been hidden for far too long. And then I told them everything. How my parents had abandoned James at the hospital, ashamed of his physical differences, how they'd hidden his existence, building their reputation on a foundation of lies. And then history repeated itself. When I got pregnant at 18, they didn't offer support or understanding. They demanded I have an abortion, ignoring the doctors who said it could leave me infertile. And when I refused, they kicked me out, their own daughter, pregnant and alone, thrown away to protect their precious reputation. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw looks of disgust directed at my parents, who seemed to shrink in their seats. For years, I've heard them talk about family values and morality. I said, my voice thick with emotion. But their actions tell a different story. They abandoned 2 of their children when we needed them most. They erased us from their lives to maintain their perfect image. The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, some at my parents, others at each other. Journalists who had come to cover a simple book signing were now frantically taking notes or speaking rapidly into their phones. In the midst of the uproar, I locked eyes with my father. The man who had loomed so large in my childhood now looked small, defeated. My mother was openly weeping, while Sarah sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and confusion. In the days that followed, the story exploded. It was all over the local news, then national. My father's political career evaporated overnight. The man who had preached about integrity and family values was exposed as a hypocrite of the highest order. His position as mayor became untenable. He resigned within a week, citing personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The college where he had taught quickly distanced themselves, terminating his position. Amidst all the chaos, one thing became clear. My sister Sarah had made her choice. She stood firmly by our parents, refusing to acknowledge the truth of what they had done. "You've ruined everything," she hissed during a brief phone call. "Don't contact me again. You're dead to me, just like you're dead to Mom and Dad." But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. A few days later, I received a call from a number I hadn't seen in over 20 years. It was Jake, Sarah's husband, and the father of my eldest son. "Carol," his voice was hesitant, almost sheepish. "I've been thinking about us, about what happened. Sarah and I, we can't have children. And I thought maybe we could have a son together. We could be a family." I couldn't help but laugh. "Jake, you made your choice 20 years ago. You abandoned me when I was pregnant with your child. You married my sister, and now just because you can't have children with her, you think you can come back to me? No, that's not how this works." "But Carol." "No, Jake. I have a wonderful husband and a beautiful family. I don't need you, and I certainly don't want you. Goodbye." I hung up, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. However, the surprises weren't over. The next day, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was from Jake's parents.